A ruthless biker mocked a wheelchair-bound black man because of a simple misunderstanding, but he had no idea that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was nearby and had overheard their confrontation. Cold air stung his hands across the quiet residential streets as Henry Parker, a 74-year-old black Vietnam War veteran, maneuvered his wheelchair from his neighborhood toward the gas station. His movements were careful and deliberate, managing his ALS symptoms that had left him wheelchair-bound. The degenerative nerve disease had progressed significantly, making even simple trips challenging. This morning he wore a thick leather jacket and trousers under the windy fall weather. Henry's weathered hands gripped the wheels of his chair, each push a testament to his determination. The crisp autumn air nipped at his face, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of colder days to come. As he made his way down the sidewalk, he couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed since the passing of his wife and his diagnosis. "One day at a time," he muttered to himself, a mantra he'd adopted to keep his spirits up. The journey to the gas station, once a simple errand, had become a significant undertaking. But Henry was not one to be deterred by challenges. He had faced far worse in the jungles of Vietnam, and he was determined to maintain his independence for as long as possible. As he approached the gas station, Henry's eyes focused on the entrance. The swing doors loomed before him, a small but significant obstacle. He wheeled himself closer, reaching out with a trembling hand to push the door open. It resisted at first, and Henry let out a soft grunt of effort. "Come on now," he encouraged himself, pushing harder. The door finally gave way, swinging open just enough for him to maneuver his wheelchair through. Once inside, he used his chair to push it wider, creating enough space to wheel himself into the store. The cool air of the convenience store washed over him, a stark contrast to the autumn chill outside. Henry paused for a moment, catching his breath and surveying the familiar layout. His eyes landed on the pharmaceutical section, and he steered his wheelchair in that direction. "Morning, Mr. Parker," called out the cashier, a young man named Tom who had grown accustomed to Henry's regular visits. "Morning, Tom," Henry replied with a nod, his voice carrying the warmth of someone who appreciated even the smallest interactions. Henry made his way to the shelves, stocked with various medications and health products. His eyes scanned the labels until he found what he was looking for: the anti-inflammatory ointment that had become crucial in managing his muscle stiffness. Without this treatment, even the smallest movements became excruciating. He reached up, his arm shaking slightly with the effort, and grasped the small tube. A sigh of relief escaped his lips as he placed it in his lap. This simple act of obtaining his medication was a victory in itself, a reminder that he could still take care of his basic needs. With the ointment secured, Henry wheeled himself to the counter. Tom rang up the medication, the beep of the scanner punctuating the quiet store. "That'll be $5, Mr. Parker," Tom announced. Henry's expression dimmed as he realized he had left his wallet at home. "Ah, lucky me and my aging memory," he remarked. He started rummaging through his jacket and pants pockets, hoping to gather enough loose change to pay the bill. "I'm sorry, Tom," Henry said, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "I seem to have left my wallet at home. Let me see what I've got here." To his relief, Henry managed to collect exactly $5 in loose change. He presented the coins to Tom, along with his veteran ID card. "Don't forget your veteran's discount, Mr. Parker," Tom reminded him with a smile. The discount reduced the cost to $4, leaving Henry with an extra $1. He glanced at the coffee machine in the corner of the store, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee tempting him. "No, I think I'll treat myself to a small coffee with that extra $1, Henry decided. "It'll make the trip back home a bit more enjoyable." As Tom prepared the coffee, Henry engaged in friendly conversation, his natural warmth shining through despite the challenges he faced. "You know, Tom," Henry began, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to solitude, "I'm grateful this store is just half a mile down the neighborhood. Makes it possible for me to wheel myself here for my medication. Living alone, it's the little things like this that make a big difference." Tom nodded, his responses minimal as he focused on his tasks serving other customers. But Henry maintained his warm demeanor, undeterred by the young man's lack of engagement. It's not easy managing on my own with this ALS, Henry continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than seeking pity. But I make do. Having this store nearby is a real blessing, given my limited mobility. There you go. Tom handed Henry his coffee, and the elderly man accepted it with genuine gratitude. Thank you, son. You have no idea how much I appreciate this little bit of normalcy in my day. Henry took a sip of the hot coffee, sighing with relief as the warmth spread through him. He carefully maneuvered his wheelchair with one hand, balancing the coffee cup in the other, as he made his way towards the exit. As he maneuvered toward the exit, Henry couldn't help but feel a small sense of accomplishment. He had made it to the store, obtained his medication, and even treated himself to a coffee. It was a reminder that despite his limitations, he could still find joy in the simple things in life. As Henry strained to push the swing door open while carefully balancing his coffee, fate took an unexpected turn. Suddenly, a biker carrying coffee appeared from the side, and in an instant, they collided. The impact sent both cups tumbling, spilling their contents and soaking Henry's lap and the floor with hot liquid. "Ah!" Henry gasped, wincing as he hurriedly reached for his handkerchief to blot the stinging heat spreading through his trousers. The shock of the collision and the sudden pain left him momentarily disoriented. "Please watch where you're going. I was just trying to push the door," he said in a strained, pained voice. Before Henry could fully register who had collided with him or what had just happened, the other man's reaction cut through his confusion like a blade. His voice was sharp and hostile, erupting into a racially charged tirade that sent a sinking feeling straight to Henry's heart. "What the hell is wrong with you?" A man with muscular build snarled, his face twisted with anger. "You should watch where you're going. Can't you just push the door or step aside so people can pass? Are you blind or can't you see straight? Or is that just too much to expect from people like you?" "I'm so sorry," Henry began, his voice steady despite the pain and humiliation. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to—" Henry's apologies fell on deaf ears as the biker's aggression escalated. "Didn't mean to," the man interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, your accident just cost me my coffee. You're going to pay for that, old man." Henry tried to explain his situation. "I'm afraid I don't have any more money on me. I spent my last dollar on my own coffee." The man's eyes narrowed, disbelief and anger warring on his face. He straightened his leather black vest to reveal his biker gang emblem. "You expect me to believe that?" he barked, his tone harsh and accusing. Tom, the cashier, glanced up from the counter, noticing the commotion by the door. "Is everything okay over there?" he called out, his voice tinged with concern. Several customers turned their heads, curious murmurs spreading through the store as they began to watch the escalating scene. A mother shielded her curious child from the sight, while two teenagers exchanged uneasy glances. "Hey man, take it easy," a bystander called out, but the biker ignored the onlookers entirely. Trying to avoid further attention inside the store, the biker grabbed the handles of Henry's wheelchair and aggressively pushed him toward the exit. Henry protested weakly, but the man's brute force was no match for his frail resistance. He maneuvered Henry around to a quieter side of the building, away from the growing crowd. The brisk morning air did little to dissipate the tension. Instead, it seemed to sharpen the moment as the biker's tone turned darker, his threats becoming increasingly physical. "Listen here, Grandpa," the biker growled, grabbing Henry's jacket and yanking the elderly man upward from his wheelchair. "I want my $3.50 for that coffee, and I want it now. Show me your wallet. Empty your pockets now." Henry's voice strained as he tried to explain once more. "Please, I'm telling you the truth. I forgot my wallet at home. I only had enough in my pocket for my medication and the small coffee. I'm not lying to you." The biker's disbelief turned to rage. "Strip you naked if I have to," he threatened, beginning to forcefully unzip Henry's jacket and pull at his arms, despite the elderly man's continued pleas. "Stop, please," Henry begged, his dignity under assault as much as his person. "I'm a veteran. I served this country. Please show some respect." But the biker was beyond reason, his hands roughly searching Henry's pockets as the elderly man struggled weakly against the assault. The scrape of his wheelchair against the concrete and Henry's desperate protests filled the air. Just as the situation reached its most dangerous point, with Henry's jacket partially removed and his dignity threatened, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "Hey, what's going on here?" Dwayne Johnson emerged from the store's entrance, his imposing figure moving swiftly toward the confrontation. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic of the situation, his voice carrying both authority and controlled anger as he demanded to know what was happening. "Is there a problem here?" Dwayne asked, his eyes darting between Henry and the biker. Recognition dawned on the biker's face as he identified the celebrity, causing him to release his grip on Henry's jacket. Despite backing down physically, the biker maintained his hostility. "This doesn't concern you, Dwayne Johnson," the biker muttered, but the bravado in his voice had diminished considerably. "When I see someone assaulting an elderly man, it becomes my concern," Dwayne replied firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. He glanced at the back of the biker's vest and saw his name embroidered there. "Rick, that's your name?" The biker, realizing he was outmatched and outnumbered, began to retreat, his expression twisted with rage. "Don't you dare mention my name," he snarled, his voice thick with venom. "And you, old man, you'll pay for this," he spat, delivering a spiteful kick to Henry's wheelchair wheel before turning away. He mounted his bike where it was parked nearby, the engine roaring to life as he sped off, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. As the sound of the motorcycle engine revving marked the biker's departure, Dwayne turned his attention to Henry. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. Henry nodded, still shaken but relieved. "Yes, just a little burn on my lap from the spilled coffee. Thank you for stepping in. My name's Henry Parker." "Nice to meet you, Henry," Dwayne said, his voice calm and steady. He gently helped Henry readjust his jacket, his eyes drifting to the coffee stains on both the elderly man's clothes and the small medication box beside him. Dwayne's brow furrowed as he noticed the damage. Henry, however, dismissed it with a wave of his hand, muttering, "It's just the box." But Dwayne wasn't convinced. "Wait here," he insisted, his tone soft but firm. "Let me go back into the store for a moment." He gave Henry a reassuring smile before turning to head back inside. The actor soon reappeared, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a small tube of burn ointment. His expression softened with genuine concern as he approached Henry. He handed over the new cup of coffee and, with careful hands, began applying the cooling gel to Henry's burned arms and fingers. "Make sure to apply this to your leg and lap when you get home," Dwayne said softly, his voice steady but warm as he offered the advice, making sure Henry was comfortable before stepping back. Henry took a sip of the coffee and thanked him for his kindness. "I can't believe this. Is it really you?" he asked, a hint of awe in his voice. "You're The Rock, aren't you? The boxer and actor." Dwayne smiled warmly. "That's right, I'm here on a short break from a nearby film shoot. Just stopped in for a snack." Henry's face lit up with recognition and fond memories. "My late wife and I, we were devoted fans. We watched all of your boxing matches together." His voice softened with nostalgia. "Those matches, they helped me cope with post-traumatic stress after returning from the war." Dwayne listened intently, touched by the personal connection. "I'm honored to hear that," he said sincerely. "Even after my wife passed," Henry continued, "I've watched all your movies. It's like keeping a part of our tradition alive." "Well, you'll have another one to look forward to next year," Dwayne shared. "We're filming it today, actually." Henry's eyes twinkled. "I'll certainly remember this day when I watch that movie when it comes out. It's an honor to meet you, truly." "The honor is mine," Dwayne replied warmly. "To serve and help a veteran like yourself. That's what real honor is about." He paused, then offered, "Can I give you a ride home? It's the least I can do after what happened." Henry considered the offer, but politely declined. "I appreciate that, but if it's all the same to you, I'd like to enjoy the fresh air and this excellent coffee. It'll help me clear my head after all this excitement." Dwayne nodded understandingly. "Of course, take care, sir, and thank you for your service." As Henry began to wheel away, he turned back one last time. "Thank you again for the coffee and for everything else." With a final wave, Henry started his journey home, the warmth of the coffee cup in his hand, a comforting reminder of the unexpected kindness he had encountered. As Henry crossed the road, a chill ran down his spine. The biker hadn't truly left. Instead, he had parked his motorcycle at the roadside near the intersection. The sight sent a wave of anxiety through Henry, prompting him to reconsider his route home. The half-mile journey suddenly felt much longer under the weight of potential threat. Henry's mind raced as he contemplated his options. The main road would be safer, with more people around, but it was also longer and more exposed. Then he remembered the dirt path that cut through a more secluded area, a shortcut he rarely used but knew well. After a moment's hesitation, Henry made his decision. To avoid confrontation, he opted for the shortcut. The dirt path wound through a more secluded area, lined with trees and bushes on both sides. As he maneuvered his wheelchair onto the narrow trail, the peaceful surroundings initially seemed to validate his choice. The quiet atmosphere and fresh air provided a sense of security. Birds chirped in the distance, and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze created a soothing backdrop. Henry found himself relaxing slightly, the tension from the earlier confrontation beginning to ebb away. Maybe this wasn't such a bad idea after all, Henry murmured to himself, taking another sip of his coffee. Maybe I should have taken this path more often. The warm liquid and the tranquil environment were a balm to his frayed nerves, but the serenity was short-lived. The tranquil moment shattered as the roar of a motorcycle engine broke through the silence. Henry's heart leaped into his throat as he recognized the sound. It was the same aggressive rev he had heard earlier at the gas station. With his heart pounding, Henry barely managed to wheel himself aside, dropping his gifted coffee as the biker sped toward him aggressively. The sudden movement nearly toppled his wheelchair, leaving him vulnerable on the narrow path. The biker's return brought intensified mockery and threats, his voice cutting through the once peaceful air. "Well, well, look who we have here," he sneered, circling Henry on his motorcycle. "Thought you could hide from me, old man?" Henry's hands gripped his wheelchair armrests tightly, his knuckles turning white. "Please," he began, his voice steady despite his fear. "I don't want any trouble. What do you want from me?" Rick laughed coldly, the sound echoing through the quiet street. "Too late for that," he sneered. "This is such a quiet road, isn't it? No one's here to save you this time." His eyes gleamed with malice as he leaned in closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "No celebrity bodyguards to hide behind now." His gaze then dropped to the ground, where the spilled coffee had stained the dirt. "And what a liar you are, old man," he muttered, watching the soil absorb the brown liquid. "Now you've got yourself a cup of coffee, but it's not going to save you." Henry tried to reason with him. "The coffee was a gift from Mr. Johnson. I told you I don't have any more money." But the biker wasn't interested in explanations. "Oh, so you're buddies with the big star now, huh? Well, let me tell you something. I'm dangerous, and you embarrassed me back there. Time to teach you a lesson." Before Henry could respond, the biker revved his engine and drove in a tight circle around him, kicking up dirt and gravel. "Let's see what a little dirt would do to such old eyes," he taunted. "Perhaps you don't need them anymore because you can't even see properly with them." Henry attempted to wheel his chair backward, but his slow, gingerly movement couldn't keep up with the speed of Rick's bike as it swerved to the side, kicking up a cloud of dirt into the air. Henry coughed, desperately trying to clear the dust from his face and eyes, but the grit stung, only making his vision blur further. The more he wiped at his eyes, the harder it became to focus, each movement only intensifying the haze. In this moment of vulnerability, the biker struck. Rick's hand shot out, grabbing Henry's wrist with a grip that was painfully tight, forcing Henry to gasp in discomfort as the pressure intensified. "What's this?" the biker sneered, eyeing Henry's wedding ring. "Looks valuable. Maybe this will cover the cost of my coffee and then some." Henry's heart raced as he realized what the biker was after. "No, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "It's my wedding ring. Why are you doing this to me?" But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The biker's eyes were fixed on the gold band, greed overtaking any remnant of humanity. The biker's grip tightened on Henry's hand as he forcefully attempted to wrench the wedding ring from his finger. Despite Henry's emotional plea explaining the ring's significance, the biker showed no mercy. "Please," Henry begged, his voice thick with desperation. "It's all I have left of her, my Clara." But the biker was beyond reason. With a final, brutal tug, he managed to pull the ring free. The forceful removal left Henry's finger aching, adding physical pain to the emotional trauma of losing this cherished symbol of his marriage. Henry's heart felt as if it had been torn from his chest. He stared at his bare finger, a pale band of skin marking where the ring had rested for decades. Tears welled in his eyes, not from the physical pain but from the overwhelming sense of loss. Just as Henry was about to sink into despair, the sound of an approaching car broke through the tension. Both Henry and the biker turned to look, and to Henry's astonishment, Dwayne Johnson emerged from the vehicle. Dwayne's face was a mask of controlled anger as he rapidly approached the scene. "I knew this would happen when I saw you still lingering on the roadside earlier," he called out, his voice carrying both authority and disappointment. The biker, caught off guard by Dwayne's sudden appearance, maintained his aggressive stance. He held up the ring, examining it in the sunlight while openly mocking Dwayne. "Well, if it isn't the big movie star again," the biker sneered. "What, you think your fame gives you the right to interfere in other people's business?" Dwayne's jaw clenched, but he kept his composure. "This isn't about fame," he said firmly. "This is about doing what's right. That ring doesn't belong to you." The biker scoffed. "Finders keepers, what are you going to do about it?" Dwayne took a step forward, his imposing physique a stark contrast to the biker's wiry frame. "I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Return the ring to Mr. Parker, and we can all walk away from this." For a moment, tension hung in the air. Then, with lightning-fast reflexes, Dwayne lunged forward and snatched the ring from the biker's grasp. In one fluid motion, he turned and handed it back to a stunned Henry. "Here you go, sir," Dwayne said gently. "I believe this belongs to you." Henry's hands shook as he accepted the ring, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered, clutching the ring to his chest. "Thank you so much." The biker, realizing he was outmatched, took a step back, but instead of fleeing, a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "Well, let's see how tough you are when you're outnumbered." He quickly dialed a number and spoke into the phone. "Hey, Bear, it's me. Get the boys and come to the dirt path off Main Street. We've got a situation here." As he hung up, a smug smile spread across his face. "My backup's on the way," he announced. "Let's see how the boxer handles a real fight." Dwayne and Henry exchanged worried glances. The peaceful resolution they had hoped for was slipping away, replaced by the looming threat of an all-out confrontation. The tension in the air was palpable as Dwayne, Henry, and the biker stood in an uneasy standoff. Dwayne's mind raced, searching for a way to defuse the situation before it spiraled further out of control. He took a deep breath, deciding to make one final attempt at peaceful resolution. Reaching into his pocket, Dwayne pulled out his wallet. "Look," he said, his voice calm and measured. "This doesn't have to end badly. Let's settle this like reasonable people." He extracted several bills and held them out to the biker. "You want a change for your spilled coffee? Here's enough, and then some. Why don't you take this and go buy yourself the best coffee in the area?" The biker's eyes narrowed, darting between Dwayne's face and the outstretched money. For a moment it seemed as if he might accept the peace offering, but then his expression hardened and he spat on the ground in contempt. "You think you can buy me off?" he snarled. "I don't want your money, I want his. And more, this isn't about the coffee anymore. This is about respect." Dwayne's shoulders sagged slightly, realizing his attempt at de-escalation had failed. He pocketed the money and turned to Henry. "I'm sorry, Mr. Parker, I tried." Henry nodded, his face etched with worry. "I appreciate your efforts, son, but I fear we're in for more trouble." As if on cue, the rumble of multiple motorcycles filled the air, growing louder by the second. The peaceful dirt path, once a shortcut for Henry's journey home, now felt like a trap closing in around them. Within moments, a group of bikers emerged from around the bend, their engines roaring as they approached. They formed a semicircle around Dwayne, Henry, and the original biker, effectively blocking any easy escape route. The tension reached a fever pitch as the newcomers dismounted, their faces hard and their body language aggressive. But then, something unexpected happened. A muscular figure stepped forward from the group, his presence commanding immediate attention. He identified himself in a gravelly voice. "I'm Mitch Bear Reynolds, leader of this gang." His eyes locked onto Dwayne, scrutinizing him intensely. Bear moved closer, peering at Dwayne's face with an almost comical intensity. After a moment, his eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "It really is you, the Rock himself." Dwayne, seizing the opportunity, quickly explained the situation. "It's nice to meet you, Bear. You see, your friend here," he gestured to the original biker, "has been harassing this elderly gentleman. Mr. Parker is a veteran who served our country. He doesn't deserve this treatment." Bear's expression shifted as he listened to the full story of what happened, his gaze moving from Dwayne to Henry and then to his gang member. The other bikers, meanwhile, began to murmur excitedly among themselves, the hostility in the air giving way to a mix of surprise and admiration for the celebrity in their midst. "Is this true, Rick?" Bear asked, his voice low and menacing as he locked eyes with the original biker. The tension in his tone was palpable. "You called us all out here just to handle a coffee spill with a veteran? A 3950 issue? Do you realize how stupid this is?" Rick, suddenly looking much less confident, stammered, It's not what it looks like, Bear. This old guy, he—" But Bear cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it," he growled. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to Henry. "Sir, on behalf of our gang, I want to apologize for any distress our former member has caused you." The atmosphere had completely transformed. What had started as a threatening confrontation was now taking on an almost surreal quality. Dwayne and Henry exchanged bewildered glances, hardly daring to believe the turn of events. As the excitement of meeting Dwayne rippled through the gang, the original threat seemed to evaporate. The dirt path, which moments ago had felt like a battlefield, now buzzed with an entirely different energy, one of unexpected camaraderie and starstruck awe. Bear, the imposing leader of the biker gang, stood at the center of attention, his face a mask of controlled anger as he turned to address Rick, the instigator of the whole ordeal. "Rick," Bear's voice rumbled, low and dangerous, "you've been a thorn in our side for too long, but this—" He gestured towards Henry, still seated in his wheelchair, looking both bewildered and relieved. "This crosses a line." Rick's bravado from earlier had all but evaporated. He stood, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between Bear and the rest of the gang. "Come on, Bear," he pleaded, his voice a shadow of its former aggression. "It was just a bit of fun, no harm done, right?" Bear's eyes narrowed. "No harm?" he repeated, his voice dripping with disgust. "You call harassing a veteran no harm?" He shook his head, disappointment evident in every line of his face. "Boys," he called out to the rest of the gang, "I think it's time we showed Rick what we think of his kind of fun." With deliberate slowness, Bear reached out towards Rick. For a moment it seemed as if he might strike him. Instead, his fingers closed around the edge of Rick's leather vest, the symbol of his membership in the gang. "We don't tolerate this kind of behavior," Bear announced, his voice steady but filled with authority, carrying over to every member present. "Not towards anyone, and especially not towards those who've served our country." He paused, locking eyes with Rick, his gaze unwavering. "If you can't even show respect to this old man, how can I trust you to respect and be loyal to our brotherhood, our bond, and our creed?" With a swift motion, Bear yanked the vest off Rick's shoulders, his fingers tightening around the fabric. "You're out, Rick," he growled. "We don't want you wearing our colors anymore." The other gang members nodded in agreement, some even letting out approving grunts. Rick stood there, stripped of his vest and his bravado, looking suddenly small and insignificant. For a moment, Rick seemed too shocked to react. Then, as the reality of his situation sank in, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're all cowards. Weak, you'll regret this. I've got connections, you know. I'll be back with a real gang behind me." but his threats fell on deaf ears. The other bikers had already turned their backs on him, forming a protective semicircle around Henry and Dwayne. With a final curse, Rick stormed off towards his motorcycle. The sound of his aggressive acceleration punctuated his dramatic departure, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the roar of Rick's motorcycle faded into the distance, Bear turned to face Henry and Dwayne. His expression had softened, a mix of regret and sincerity replacing the anger from moments before. "Mr. Parker," Bear began, his voice gentler than one might expect from a man of his stature. "I want to apologize on behalf of our entire group. Rick's been a troublemaker for a while now, and this incident, well, it gave us the perfect reason to finally cut ties with him." Henry, still processing the rapid turn of events, nodded slowly. I appreciate that," he said, his voice steady despite the lingering shock. "It's not every day an old-timer like me finds himself in the middle of such excitement. It's like being in a movie." A chuckle rippled through the group, breaking the last of the tension. Dwayne, who had been watching the proceedings with a mix of amazement and approval, stepped forward. "I have to say," he began, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "this is not how I expected my coffee run to go this morning, but I'm glad to see things working out for the better." Bear nodded, extending a hand first to Dwayne, then to Henry. "Mr. Johnson, it's an honor, and Mr. Parker, thank you for your service. If there's anything we can do to make up for this unfortunate incident, please don't hesitate to ask." As Henry shook Bear's hand, he couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns life could take. Here he was, a 74-year-old veteran, surrounded by leather-clad bikers and a Hollywood star, all because of a simple trip to the gas station. As the tension dissipated and the atmosphere shifted to one of unexpected camaraderie, Dwayne's eyes lit up with an idea. "Hey," he suggested, pulling out his phone, "before we all go our separate ways, how about we capture this moment? It's not every day you get a group like this together." The bikers' faces brightened at the prospect, and even Henry found himself nodding in agreement. "Why not?" he chuckled, a glint of humor in his eyes. "It'll make quite a story for my next doctor's appointment. I can already imagine them all shaking their heads, thinking I'm just a rumbling old man with some wild dream." He shrugged, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips, as the absurdity of the situation seemed to lighten the mood. Dwayne positioned himself next to Henry's wheelchair, while Bear and the other bikers gathered around them. The resulting image was a striking tableau, the elderly veteran in his wheelchair, surrounded by leather-clad bikers and a famous actor, all wearing genuine smiles. As Dwayne reviewed the photo, making sure it had turned out well, his phone suddenly buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and grimaced slightly. "It's my manager," he explained. "I should probably take this." Stepping aside, Dwayne answered the call. The others could hear snippets of the conversation, something about being late for a scene and the production schedule being tight. When he returned to the group, Dwayne's face was apologetic. "I'm really sorry, but I've got to head back to set," he explained. "Mr. Parker, are you sure you don't want me to drive you home? It wouldn't be any trouble." Henry, however, had been watching the bikers with a thoughtful expression. The morning's events, as stressful as they had been at times, had awakened something in him. A spark of adventure, he thought, had long since faded. "Actually," Henry began, a mischievous glint in his eye, "if it's all right with these gentlemen, I think I'd like to ride with them instead." The bikers looked at each other in surprise, then broke into wide grins. Bear stepped forward, a mixture of respect and excitement on his face. "Mr. Parker, it would be our genuine pleasure to escort you home." Dwayne looked taken aback for a moment, then broke into a warm smile. "Well, it looks like you're in good hands, Mr. Parker. Just promise me you'll be careful, all right?" Henry nodded, his face alight with anticipation. "Don't you worry about me, son. I may be old, but I've still got a few surprises left in me." With that decided, the group sprang into action. Bear personally helped Henry onto his motorcycle, ensuring he was securely seated. Other members carefully folded Henry's wheelchair, strapping it securely to one of their bikes. As the bikers prepared their motorcycles, Dwayne knelt beside Henry, who was now perched on the back of Bear's bike. "Mr. Parker," he said softly, Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late for new adventures. You take care now, you hear? Henry reached out and clasped Dwayne's hand. And thank you, son, for stepping in when an old man needed help. You're a credit to your profession and to yourself. With a final wave, Dwayne headed back to his car. The sound of its engine fading into the distance marked the beginning of Henry's unexpected adventure. As Dwayne's car disappeared around a bend, Henry found himself at the center of a rumbling circle of motorcycles. The vibration of Bear's bike beneath him was both exhilarating and slightly terrifying, a far cry from his usual mode of transportation. "You ready, Mr. Parker?" Bear called over his shoulder, his voice barely audible over the collective roar of the engines. "Hold tight." Henry tightened his grip around Bear's waist and nodded, a mixture of nervousness and excitement coursing through him. "As ready as I'll ever be," he shouted back. With a coordinated rev of engines, the group set off. They formed a protective formation around Bear's bike, with Henry securely seated behind him. As they moved through the quiet streets, Henry felt a rush of exhilaration he hadn't experienced in years. The wind whipped past them, carrying away the last traces of that morning's fear and replacing it with unexpected joy. Henry found himself laughing, the sound lost in the roar of the engines but the feeling of it vibrating in his chest. As they rode, Henry's thoughts turned to Clara, his late wife. In his heart he shared this moment with her, imagining her reaction to seeing him on the back of a motorcycle at his age. "Oh, Clara," he thought, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips, "you wouldn't believe the day I've had. Can you see me now, old girl? You're Henry riding with a biker gang." He could almost hear her laughter, could almost feel her arms around him as they used to sit together on their porch swing. The journey took them through parts of town Henry rarely saw anymore. Streets he once walked freely now flew by in a blur of color and movement. He marveled at how different everything looked from this new perspective. Houses and shops he thought he knew well seemed transformed by the speed and angle of their passage. As they approached more familiar territory, Henry pointed out his street to Bear. The sight of his modest home, now approached by a procession of motorcycles, created a striking contrast that symbolized the extraordinary nature of his morning. The gang's formation naturally tightened as they prepared to deliver their charge safely home. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains and over fences, their expressions a mix of concern and fascination at the unusual sight. Bear expertly maneuvered his motorcycle to a stop directly in front of Henry's house, the rest of the gang forming a protective semicircle around them. With gentle care that belied his rough appearance, Bear helped Henry dismount. As Henry's feet touched the ground, he felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. The ride had been short, but it had awakened something in him, a reminder that life could still surprise him, even at his age. "Thank you, Bear," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "And thank you all," he added, looking around at the group of bikers. "This has been, well, it's been quite something." Bear smiled, a warm, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "The pleasure was ours, Mr. Parker. It's not every day we get to ride with a real hero." As the other bikers carefully retrieved and unfolded Henry's wheelchair, curious neighbors continued to watch from a distance. Henry could almost hear the gossip starting, the quiet old veteran suddenly in the company of a biker gang. The thought made him chuckle. As Henry settled back into his wheelchair, the bikers gathered around him, their imposing figures contrasting sharply with the quiet suburban setting. There was a moment of silence, as if no one quite knew how to conclude this unexpected adventure. Bear was the first to speak. "Mr. Parker," he began, his gruff voice softened with respect, "I hope you don't mind, but the boys and I were talking. We'd like to give you our numbers in case you ever need anything." Henry blinked in surprise, then smiled. "Well, that's mighty kind of you, Bear. I'd appreciate that." One by one, the bikers approached Henry, each offering a scrap of paper with a hastily scribbled phone number. Some added nicknames that ranged from the intimidating to the oddly endearing: Crusher, Tiny, Whiskers. Henry accepted each with genuine gratitude, touched by this unexpected show of support. Bear was the last to approach, kneeling down beside Henry's wheelchair to speak more privately. "Mr. Parker, I want you to have my personal number," he said, his voice low and serious. If that troublemaker Rick ever shows up again, or if you have any problems at all, you call me. Day or night, understand?" Henry nodded, deeply moved. "Thank you, Bear. I can't tell you how much this means to a lonely old man like me." As the group prepared to depart, Henry couldn't help but reflect on the strange turns his day had taken. What had started as a simple errand for medication had transformed into a life-affirming adventure, complete with danger, celebrity encounters, and newfound friendships. The bikers mounted their motorcycles, the rumble of engines filling the quiet street once more. With a chorus of waves and shouts of goodbye, they began to pull away, their formation as tight and protective as it had been on the journey there. Henry watched as the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. The medicine bottle in his pocket, the original reason for his journey, now seemed almost incidental compared to the experiences and connections he had gained. As the excitement of the morning began to settle, Henry's thoughts turned once again to Clara. He could almost see her standing beside him, her eyes twinkling with that mischievous light he had always loved. "Well, darling," he murmured softly, "what do you make of all this? You're Henry, making friends with a biker gang at his age." He chuckled softly, imagining her response. I know. You always said I had a knack for finding trouble, but this time I think I found something more." With a contented sigh, Henry began to wheel himself towards his front door. The events of the morning had left him tired but invigorated in a way he hadn't felt in years. As he reached for his house key, he paused, looking back at the street where so much had transpired in such a short time. The neighborhood was quiet once more, the only evidence of the morning's excitement being the lingering looks from curious neighbors. Henry smiled to himself, knowing that his little adventure would be the talk of the block for weeks to come. As he pushed his wheelchair inside his home, Henry carefully took off his shoes and wheeled himself further into the living room. He settled into his favorite armchair, the familiar comfort wrapping around him as he rocked gently back and forth. With his eyes closed, he let the peaceful rhythm soothe him for a moment. When he opened them again, his gaze landed on the framed photo of Clara sitting on the TV table across him. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed to radiate a new warmth, as if she too was proud of his unexpected bravery and openness to embracing new experiences. It was as if her presence, even in memory, was offering quiet encouragement for the path he was now walking. With a slight grunt, Henry began to apply the anti-inflammatory ointment to his aching joints. The familiar routine was comforting after the excitement of the day, a gentle reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary adventures begin with the simplest errands.